The sun was low, turning Dustvale's dirt street the color of old whiskey when Lydia dropped her coin purse in the mud. She didn't curse or chase it, just watched it sink a little, like everything else in her life had a habit of doing. The men near the well laughed about something that wasn't funny to her. They never noticed her anyway. She'd been in this town long enough to learn that silence drew less trouble than pride. Elias Ward saw it from where he was tying his horse. The animal snorted, impatient for water, but he stood still a moment longer, watching her bend to pick up that purse. She was careful, almost graceful, like someone afraid of taking up space. He wondered who had taught her that lesson so well. He stepped forward without thinking, boots sinking into the soft earth. "Ma'am," he said, stooping to grab the little brown pouch. Their hands brushed, and she flinched, not from fear but from habit. He saw the faint scar on her wrist, old but deep. He'd seen that kind before, the kind that came from trying to hold on when life yanked too hard. "You dropped this," he said. "I know." Her voice was soft, unsteady but polite. "Thank you," he nodded once, but he didn't move right away. She reminded him of someone, a wife, a sister, maybe just a ghost from a road too long behind him. "You work up by the wash house?" he asked. "Most days. They need hands that don't mind the cold." He looked at her then, really looked. The plain cotton dress, the worn boots, the way she kept her eyes down even when she spoke the truth. He thought of all the women who came and went in mining towns, bright, laughing, sharp as new coins, and how this one seemed carved from something quieter, stronger. "I don't shine like the others," she said suddenly, as if apologizing for standing there. "That's why I saw you," he said. She looked up then, and for the first time he saw the color of her eyes, gray, like storm clouds that hadn't decided whether to break or pass. The moment hung there, fragile and strange. He wanted to ask her name, but the words stuck. The years had taught him that asking too much could break whatever peace you stumbled into. So he tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode on. She watched him go until the dust swallowed him, wondering why a stranger's kindness could hurt worse than cruelty. That night, in her one-room cabin by the river, she kept thinking about the way he'd said it. "That's why I saw you." People didn't see her. They saw her work, the buckets she carried, the shirts she scrubbed, the meals she cooked when she could find flour enough. But her? No one looked at her in years, not since Daniel died in that cave collapse 3 winters ago. The mind took him, like it took everything else. She sat by the weak fire, turning the little purse over in her hands. It wasn't the lost coin that mattered. It was the way he'd picked it up, careful, like it was worth something. Like she was, Elias rode north toward the ridge, his horse slowing as night came down. He didn't plan on staying in Dustvale long, just long enough to earn a few dollars hauling timber. But something about that woman stayed with him. The quiet steadiness, the absence of pretense. He'd known pretty women. He'd known liars too. The worst ones were both. Lydia, he didn't know her name yet, but he could tell, wasn't one of them. She carried the kind of sorrow that didn't beg for attention, the kind that taught a person how to keep walking. He stopped by a campfire that night, the kind built low so it wouldn't draw eyes. As he watched the flames, he thought about her voice, about the way she said she didn't shine. He almost laughed. Shine was for silver and fools. What lasted was iron. In Dustvale, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Lydia leaned against the window frame and whispered into the dark, as if someone might still be listening. "You saw me," she said, and didn't know why that mattered so much. Outside, the first drop of rain hit the dust, and neither of them could guess how much that simple moment would cost, or what it might heal. The storm had been building since dawn, the kind that made the sky look bruised and the air smell like old tin. Lydia had been mending shirts when the first gust slammed against the shutters. She muttered something under her breath, set down her needle, and went to check the fire. Wind hissed through the cracks. Her roof had held through worse, or so she thought. By nightfall, the rain came sideways. Buckets filled faster than she could empty them. One leaked right over the stove, turning supper into gray mush. She was tired, cold, and mostly angry at herself for caring that no one would knock. No one ever did, until someone did. It wasn't a timid knock. More like someone trying to be polite but failing at it. Lydia froze, hand hovering near the iron poker. "Who's there?" "Elias Ward," came the voice, roughened by rain and distance. Just looking for a place to tie my horse. Roof's given up out there, she hesitated. The last time a man came knocking, he'd wanted more than shelter. But this one, she remembered his voice from the trading yard. The way he'd said, "That's why I saw you." It had lingered all week, unwanted but warm. "Go on then," she said. "Porch'll keep him dry." There was a pause. "Ma'am, I reckon it ain't right to ask, but that wind's got teeth. Could I step in for a minute, just till it slows?" She looked around her cabin, small, plain, tidy like always. No reason to feel ashamed. "All right, wipe your boots first." When he stepped in, the lamplight caught his face. Rain slicked, jaw shadowed, eyes soft, despite the years. He took off his hat, water dripping to the floorboards. "Appreciate it," he said. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking. It was thin and bitter, but he drank it like it was gold. "Roof holding?" he asked after a moment. "Mostly, except the parts that aren't." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes but tried. "You mind if I patch it come morning? I got nails and steady hands left." "I don't take charity," she said quickly, old habit tightening her voice. "Then call it a trade. I fix the roof. You keep the coffee coming." That made her pause. "You've done this before, haven't you?" "Talking your way into things," he laughed quietly. "Only when I mean it." The wind banged hard against the walls, making the lamp flicker. For a long while they didn't speak. Just listened to the storm breathe around them. Elias studied her hands as she mended a torn sleeve, fingers steady despite the cold. There was something about the way she worked. Careful, deliberate, as if she were stitching her own calm into the fabric. "You live alone," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Most women around here do, one way or another." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. He'd buried his share of people, lost his share of faith. Maybe that's why her quiet didn't scare him. It mirrored his own. When she finally glanced up, his gaze was waiting, gentle but unguarded. "You'll want a blanket," she said, trying not to sound kind. "Only if you got an extra." "I always do." For no good reason. He took it, careful not to brush her hand. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. "You're not from here," she said after a moment. "No one really is. We just stopped long enough to fool ourselves." That earned him a small smile. "So what are you fooling yourself about, Elias Ward?" He looked toward the window, where rain streaked down the glass like melted silver. "That maybe this time I'll stay long enough to matter." Silence again. Comfortable this time. The kind that didn't need patching. When he finally stretched out by the fire, hat over his chest, she sat a while longer watching him. The lines around his eyes told stories of places she'd never go. He looked like someone who'd been both trusted and betrayed, and didn't know which hurt more. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, the air settled. Lydia leaned back, letting her hands fall into her lap. She'd spent so long expecting nothing that the smallest kindness felt dangerous. In the corner, Elias murmured something half in sleep. She couldn't catch it all, only one word. "Stay." She smiled to herself barely. "We'll see," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she didn't mind the sound of the rain. Morning came quietly, as if the storm had spent all its fury and left the world too tired to move. Lydia woke to the sound of soft hammering outside, steady and patient. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw Elias through the fogged window, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, climbing along the roof with a handful of nails and a calm she hadn't seen in years. She stood there for a while, half hidden behind the curtain, watching him work. He didn't move like a man trying to impress anyone, just someone fixing what needed fixing. She couldn't remember the last time anyone did something for her without asking for something back. By the time she stepped out with a cup of coffee, he'd finished patching the corner and was sitting on the edge, hat tipped low against the sun. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said, glancing down. "You didn't. Storm did that part." He smiled faintly. Roof's sound again. "Should hold another winter." She handed him the cup, pretending it wasn't kindness. "Coffee's weak, but it's hot." "I've drunk worse," he said, and she believed him. They sat on the steps for a while, the morning wind moving gentle through the sage. There wasn't much talk, just the kind of silence that starts to feel like company. Lydia thought about how strange it was, sharing her space with someone after so long. The chair across from her had always been empty. The second cup always clean. She'd stopped setting it out years ago. Now it sat there again, like it remembered something she didn't dare to. He stayed. Not because she asked him to, but because leaving didn't seem to occur to either of them. He helped chop wood, hauled water from the well, fixed a hinge that had groaned for months. She mended his torn shirts, cooked what she could, and tried not to notice how natural it all felt. Two lives quietly leaning toward each other without saying so. One evening, when the sky was the color of old copper, he told her about the mine accident. About the friend he couldn't save. His voice didn't shake, but something inside it did. Lydia didn't speak. She just listened, fingers wrapped around her cup until they hurt. "I used to think hard work made a man clean," he said. "Turns out it just makes him tired." She looked at him, really looked. "Maybe it's not the work that makes a man clean," she said. "Maybe it's what he fixes when no one's watching." He gave a soft laugh. "You talk like someone who's done her share of fixing." "Someone had to," she said, and left it there. Later that week, he came back from town with something small wrapped in cloth. She frowned when he handed it to her. "What's this?" "Found it in the general store. Thought you might want it." She opened it carefully, a little hand mirror, oval and worn. Her reflection looked back, older, plainer, marked by time. "I don't need to see myself," she said, trying to hand it back. "Maybe not," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "But maybe you should see what I see." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "You've got a kind imagination, Mr. Ward." "Not imagination," he said, eyes steady on hers. "Just better vision than most." The words stayed with her long after he'd gone back outside to split wood. She caught herself glancing at that little mirror on the table, half curious, half afraid. She wasn't sure if she liked being seen, but she was starting to remember what it felt like. That night, they sat by the fire in their usual quiet, the rhythm of crackling wood and soft breathing filling the cabin. Outside, coyotes howled somewhere far off, and the world felt wide again, but not empty. He watched the flames dance low and thought about how peace didn't always come in grand ways. Sometimes it arrived in small moments, a warm cup, a quiet roof, a woman who didn't shine but glowed steady in her own light. And Lydia, sitting across from him, thought maybe storms didn't just break things. Sometimes they brought someone worth sheltering. By the time spring dust began to settle on the valley, the cabin no longer looked like a place meant for just one person. The new roof held through every rain, and the porch carried 2 pairs of boots now instead of 1. Most mornings began the same way. Lydia stirring the fire, Elias fixing something that didn't quite need fixing. It should have felt simple, safe even. But nothing in Dust Vale ever stayed quiet for long. Word travels faster than truth in small towns, and it didn't take much to start the whispering. A widow keeping company with a drifter, well, that was enough to fill the saloon and the church steps both. Lydia heard it first at the general store. Mrs. Alden, the preacher's wife, stopped talking mid-sentence the moment she walked in. The others followed suit, all smiles gone thin and sharp. Lydia pretended not to notice, but the air around her burned. When Elias came in from hauling fence posts later that day, she didn't tell him. Not at first. He'd worked hard, his shirt damp with sweat, his face lined with quiet satisfaction. She didn't have the heart to drop the weight of other people's ugliness on that. But gossip has a way of finding the ones it means to wound. 2 nights later, Elias overheard it in the saloon. 2 miners laughing about the woman with the quiet mouth and the wandering cowboy. He set his glass down hard enough to crack it. "Don't," said the barkeep, an old man who'd seen too many bad choices start just like that. "Ain't worth it, son." Elias left without a word, but the fury followed him all the way home. Lydia was at the table sewing when he came in. One look at his face and she knew. "Who was it this time?" she asked softly. "Doesn't matter," he said, pacing. "They don't get to talk about you that way." She set the needle down. "They will. People talk. That's what they do when they're bored." "They're calling you—" "I know what they're calling me," she cut in, calm but trembling. "And if you start swinging, it'll make it true for them." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. Elias stopped moving, staring at the floorboards. He exhaled, slow and uneven. "I don't like being the reason someone hurts." "You're not," she said. Then quieter, "Not unless you leave." He looked up at her, confusion softening into something worse, fear. He'd spent half his life running from towns just like this, from blame that wasn't his. Part of him wanted to pack up before the dust settled. That's what he knew how to do. But leaving now would make the whispers right, and staying might break her. Lydia turned away before he could answer. "If you're going to go," she said, "go before they're right about us." He wanted to argue, to promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. Instead, he reached for his hat, stared at it a long time, and set it down again. Then he picked it back up. "Maybe I should," he murmured. "Then do it." Her voice didn't rise, but it cracked at the edges, like a fence post ready to give. The next morning, when she stepped outside, his tracks were already fading in the sand. The air smelled like rain that wouldn't come. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, not to hold herself together, but to keep from waving him back. Inside the cabin, the silence was too clean. No boots, no hammer, no second cup cooling on the table. Just the sound of the wind moving through what he'd fixed. Dustvale went on talking, of course. It always did. But Lydia didn't listen. She kept working, sweeping, cooking, mending, because the only way to survive being left was to act like you weren't. Still, every now and then, when the wind changed direction, she'd catch the faint echo of hoofbeats far beyond the ridge, and though she told herself it was just her heart making noise again, she'd stop, just for a moment, and listen. The morning he returned, Dustvale was still half asleep. The town's dust hadn't moved, the gossip hadn't cooled, but the light felt different, cleaner somehow. Lydia didn't see him at first. She just heard the hammer. One sharp strike, then another, rhythmic, certain. She stepped out onto her porch, broom in hand, and froze. Elias Ward was there, same coat, same quiet eyes, unloading a wagon full of lumber in front of her cabin. He looked thinner, older maybe, but the kind of older that came with thinking too much and sleeping too little. "Roof's holding," she said after a long silence. "Not the porch," he replied. "Boards are soft. Could use new nails." He didn't ask to come back. Didn't explain where he'd been. He just started working, the way he always did. Steady, unbothered by eyes watching. And there were eyes. Half the town had found reasons to pass by the ridge that morning, pretending to gather firewood or check on fences that hadn't fallen. Lydia felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to tell him to stop, to go before they started whispering again. But she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the post, the same way she had the day he first spoke to her. "You trying to prove something?" "Not to them," he said, driving another nail. She watched him a long time before stepping closer. "You didn't have to come back, I know," he kept hammering. But I reckon leaving was the wrong kind of silence. Her throat tightened. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to remind him of the ache, the days of sweeping an empty floor, of eating alone again. But she saw something in his face that stopped her, a quiet, tired humility that looked a lot like hers. By midday, the new planks were set. He straightened up, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked toward her. "You still got coffee?" She sighed, but there was the faintest curve to her mouth. "Always." They sat on the steps like they used to, 2 cups between them, wind tugging at the hem of her dress. Neither spoke for a long while. When they finally did, the words came small but true. "You said once I don't shine," she murmured. "I remember. You were right. I don't." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had that first day. "That's not what I meant. You just don't need to." Her eyes softened. "And you ever stop running?" He thought about it, gaze fixed on the hills stretching west. "Maybe not, but I found somewhere I don't have to." For the first time in months, Lydia let herself laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was whole. "You always did have a way of making things sound simpler than they are." "Life's hard enough without adding fancy words," he said. The afternoon drifted into a golden hush. Neighbors kept peeking from the road, but Lydia didn't hide this time. Let them see. Let them talk. For once, she didn't care. When the last light dipped behind the ridge, Elias gathered his tools, but she stopped him at the door. "You fixed what was broken," she said softly. "Not everything," he answered. She hesitated, then handed him her old mirror, the one he'd given her weeks ago. "Maybe this time you look," she said. He took it carefully, and for a moment, their fingers touched. Just long enough for something unspoken to settle between them. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the sky turned the color of promise. Dustvale, for once, had nothing left to say. Lydia leaned against the doorway, eyes following the man who had come back not for pride, Not for forgiveness, but for home. And somewhere in that soft, amber silence, she whispered, "You're home now."